Iran-backed militias fired rockets at U.S. troops in Syria within hours of those airstrikes. Let's bring in former State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus. Always great to see you, Morgan.
Thank you, Shannon. You too.
So let's start here. This is a vow of revenge from an Iranian-backed Iraqi militia, quoted by the AP, saying, "We will avenge the blood of our righteous martyrs against the perpetrators of this heinous crime, and with God's help, we will make the enemy taste the bitterness of revenge." Doesn't sound like this thing's going to wrap up neatly.
No, and in fact, in all fairness, these sorts of attacks were also going on the last few years of the Trump administration. When I was working for Secretary Mike Pompeo, we were dealing with this. But it's important to note that Democrats were criticizing our campaign of maximum economic pressure against the Iranian regime, and said that our campaign of maximum pressure, when we targeted Soleimani and took him out, that was the reason that Iran was acting out. We now know that those criticisms were not valid. And in fact, the regime in Iran doesn't care if it's maximum pressure or maximum appeasement by the Biden administration. They're going to continue these attacks through their proxies on U.S. troops and interests in Iraq and in Syria because they are a terrorist state. They are the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. That's why they're doing it.
And yet we're now having conversations with them about the JCPOA or the Iran nuke deal. So how do we balance, some say that these airstrikes are telegraphing strength, that President Biden is saying, listen, we're coming to the table with you, want to have that conversation, but we're not going to look away from the rest of what you're doing. So how do you balance those things?
So that's a great question, Shannon. And part of me is hesitant to criticize the Biden administration because I know they're getting hit from their left on these strikes. And while it's important to show action, what President Biden and his team need to do is to restore deterrence so the regime in Iran does not empower their Shia proxies in Iraq and Syria to attack U.S. forces. So one must ask themselves, did these strikes in the middle of the night in empty warehouses that killed no militants, do those strikes restore deterrence? Well, clearly not, because the regime in Iran is continuing to equip these proxies and these terrorist groups that are attacking us. So while I am supportive of the action, I think President Biden and his team are going to need to step it up if they are truly going to restore deterrence. And one thing that they especially should not do is to give $90 billion in sanctions relief to the regime that is attacking through their proxies our U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. I mean, that's really, if you zoom back out, Shannon, to the bigger picture, what's so befuddling to me is in the JCPOA, as it currently exists, there are no prohibitions on Iran for their terrorist activity, for purchasing more arms, for the rockets and missiles. So we're going to give $90 billion to the country that is already attacking us so that they can, that inevitably funds more attacks. It's totally illogical.
Well, it didn't make a lot of sense the last time we did it, and the number was even bigger. So let's talk about Iraq now, because that is a complex, difficult, delicate situation and relationship between the U.S. and Iraq. And they've said this violated our sovereignty and we don't appreciate it. So where do we go from there on that one?
Yeah, Iraq has been the leadership has been in between Iraq and a hard place for a long time because they have us there. I believe we are a positive presence, but obviously Iran is their neighbor, and so they have to deal with malign Iranian influence for for quite some time. So we are there. Our troops are there on a counterterrorism mission. We are there to make sure that ISIS does not reemerge and that it does not become a threat to the homeland. Secretary Blinken was just at countering ISIS ministerial working on this issue. And really, we've seen the relationship with the government of Iraq mature in many ways, right? It's gone beyond just counterterrorism to a normal bilateral relationship. I think it's important as we shift and pivot to focusing more on Asia, more on China, and countering the Chinese Communist Party, that we still have a small terrorist in a small group of troops, a small intelligence capability, small footprint in places like Iraq in order to counter the terrorist threat. But that's why I'm concerned that there are pockets around the world where these threats are creeping back up. You know, Shannon, in the last 6-7 months of the Biden administration, there have been no airstrikes against al-Shabaab, for example, in Somalia, a terrorist entity. And so we're leaving Afghanistan as well. And while I'm not necessarily overtly critical of that move, we've got to look, the Biden administration needs to tell the American people what the plan are for places bases in Somalia where there's terrorists and we're no longer doing strikes? What's the plan in Afghanistan? And certainly I would encourage them to double down on the responding to the Iranian Shia groups that are attacking U.S. forces in Iraq. Don't just attack empty warehouses at night. Kill a few bad guys. We'll support you if you do it.
Yeah. All right, Morgan Ortagus, always appreciate your expertise. Thanks for stopping in.
Thanks, Shannon.